This entire year has had a recurring theme that we didn't really intend going into it. We've covered A, a lot of films that made the Sight and Sound's Top 100 list last December, not to mention previous Sight and Sound lists. And B, we've made sure to discuss filmmakers who've never come up before. So we're talking Mae West, Terrence Malick, Barbra Streisand, Harold Lloyd, John Garfield, Yasuhiro Ozu, Jamie Lee Curtis, and Richard Widmark. Well, today, Federico Fellini comes up for the first time. But in all those recent groundbreaking episodes, and in about 470 of the other 537, we've been telling you guys about Sparkplug Coffee. Sparkplug has the freshest, fairly traded premium Arabica beans in our home country of Canada. Got a lot of air in my lungs there. You can score half calf and decaf, and you can get whatever type you like from their large collection of blends and roasts. Now I'm high in air. They even allow you to shake it up with rotating seasonal blends. So if you'd like something the Italians prefer, surf around sparkplug.coffee and find something that appeals to your Italiano tongue. Sparkplug delivers to folky folks in the United States and Canada within a week, and we Canadians don't even have to pay for shipping. And you'd be wise to consider becoming a member of the Autopilot Coffee Club. Do that, and you'll get perks and deals that some Joe Schmo non-regular buyer will not get. You'll also save money on every order. And why not customize to get your orders when it suits you? Maybe you need your stuff frequently. Maybe you don't need it very often at all. They're flexible. You can also cancel or even just pause your membership anytime. A Coffee of the Month club this is not. So go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES to save 20% off the next order you make, whether it's the first time you've been on that site or the 21st time. Our HYES promo code is the key to saving a little money while also getting something yummy in your mug. Something yummy in your muggy. All right then, the time has come to talk about Fellini. Bev, tell the music man to get that tune a-rockin'.
And action! Have you ever seen
8.5. Ciao and grazie for listening to what we have to say in the 538th dose, number 538 of Have You Ever Seen's Podcasting Magic. We've been reviewing magic. Whoa. La-di-da. We've been reviewing classic films since March 2013, and with rare exceptions, we always spoil the movie of the day. I'm the guy who's full of self-doubt and has a brutal case of director's block, but doesn't have a harem of women who will turn on him in my own fantasy about them. Ryan Ellis. And here's my wife, the lady who, if she made science fiction films, just might make them autobiographical. That ideal woman, Bev.
That's me.
The Claudia Cardinale of this room.
Oh, gosh.
Could be Becca, the foster dog we still have.
Oh, she's my dream girl.
She's the Claudia Cardinale. No, you be Claudia, she can be Louisa or something.
The dog is Louisa. Summon the dog in this scenario.
As is our custom in these movies where we talk about other languages, Italian in this case, we will say we're sorry up front for probably botching some or many of the names and pronunciations and so on.
I would also like to apologize for occasionally exaggerating my Italian accent. I'm not making fun of Italians. It's just fun.
The hand gesture might come into play.
Hey!
You just did it right there. All right, the coming attractions trivia for a very Italian man, Federico Fellini. He had an incredible career. He was nominated for 12 Oscars, including 4 for directing. 4 of his films, including 8.5, won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. Now they call that international feature. His movies were often joyful, but the trivia question is a sad one. Which famous Hollywood actor died the very same day that Fellini did, on Halloween, October 31st, 1993?
I don't know. I forgot to look this up. What's the answer, babe?
River Phoenix.
Oh, that is sad.
Usually,
oh, man, I thought it was going to be somebody in their 90s. Cary Grant. I know it's not him, but now that's a bummer.
Usually I want these questions to inspire a, wow, that's fascinating type response or start some kind of discussion, which this isn't really going to, I don't think. There's no connection between Federico and River. Although we are only about a month away from Halloween, and here we've got 2 guys both breathing their last breath that very day, which is appropriately creepy for Halloween to die that day. Also, Federico Fellini died the day after his 50th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And if you look at his acceptance speech when he won the honorary Oscar that year, earlier that year, and other things I've heard about him, very much loved his wife too. So you could say, of course that's tragic. No, but it really was for him. And 50 years they were together. So not really all that relevant to the movie. Let's get into it then. The Beautiful Confusion. That's what the writer, one of the writers, who was it? Anyway, one of the writers wanted to call it The Beautiful Confusion. I don't know what that would have been in Italian, but it was released in Italy 60 years ago in mid-February 1963, then came out in this part of the world later that June. The film seems to have done all right at the box office. But Bev, since the movie's 60 years old, help us out a little bit if you give us a skinny. So tell us what 8.5 is all about.
Marcello Mastroianni is Marcello Mastroianni is Guido Anselmi, a lauded mid-career director who's creatively blocked as the production of his latest film goes full steam ahead. While trying to escape the pressure at a health spa, he's visited by his producers who goad him to work, a critic who criticizes his ideas, his mistress who desires his attention, and his wife who isn't sure why she's there at all. The pressure and the creative atrophy collide in a mixture of the present, the past, and Guido's fantasies.
Mm-hmm. Or, in a nutshell, 8.5, huh? Bragger. It's not the size of the number of films you've made, Federico. It's how you use it. If I can quote Michael Caine in Goldmember, Austin Powers in Goldmember there. So he'd made 7 movies. He co-directed one of them.
Another feature.
And then he made 2 shorts.
Yeah.
So that's 8.5. Summing up a career already. He'd already made La Strada and La Dolce Vita. So if he didn't even make this movie, he just went off and did something else or died, still, what a hell of a career that was.
Yeah, wasn't La Strada, La Dolce Vita, and 8.5, those were like 3 in a row, right? Back to back?
I don't know if they were quite back to back, but...
Well, this definitely came after La Dolce Vita.
It did, yeah. Okay, the critical numbers on Rotten Tomatoes are great. 98% of critics like the film. 9.8. The average is 8.5 out of 10. There are 60 reviews on the site, and 92% of audiences also. The film won 2 Oscars. And this is not that common back then for a foreign language film to win Oscars the same year it came out in Italy or Japan or Sweden or wherever. They released this, like I said, not that long after it came out in Italy. Piero Gherardi won for the black and white costumes. His acceptance speech at the Oscars, by the way, was something like, "Grazie, bye." Barely said anything
Probably
at all.
doesn't speak English.
That could be what it was, yeah. I think he did say thank you. Anyway, he didn't say much. And he won for best foreign language film. Fellini's movies won that 4 times. La Strada was one of them, and did I write them all down? I forget now. La Dolce Vita, I believe, was another one. It was nominated for 3 others. Fellini for Best Director, the original screenplay by him and a bunch of other people we'll talk about later, and Piero Gherardi did the sets also. That was nominated.
Pretty impressive when you consider when we talk about foreign language films from this time in history, we often talk about how, they came out in Japan in this year, and Americans found out about it 2 years later. I don't think there was a very big market in America at the time for foreign language films, but Fellini obviously bucked that trend.
And then they got nominated for Oscars. Sometimes they might get 1 or 2. Foreign language film obviously was a big one, but they wouldn't break through and get technicals or best director. But this happened to him many times.
It's only now starting to happen more often.
Very true, especially very recently. The last 20 years, I guess you could say, too. Crouching Tiger.
Yes, Crouching Tiger is a big one.
Parasite, we know about that, winning Best Picture and so on, the big ones. Fellini had those 12 nominations and never won, but did win an honorary Oscar in 1993. Did I say that already? So that was months before he died, and he referenced his wife in the speech. Mastroianni and Sophia Loren presented the award to Fellini. His directing nominations were for La Dolce Vita, this, Satyricon, and Amarcord. The great thing about Amarcord, Spielberg, they had a camera on him. I've heard this before and actually saw it in the last couple of years. Spielberg is with some friends. That's the year of Jaws. So they announce everybody, and he says something like, "I can't believe they went with Fellini over me." Like he's disgusted that this legendary director at that point was nominated instead of him, although Spielberg should have been.
For his very first film, too.
Second film.
Oh, well, Duel was a TV movie, wasn't it?
Sugarland Express was before that, but still.
I always forget about that.
8.5 has been on the Sight and Sound's Top 100 every single time since 1972. That was the first time it could have been on. Of course, it didn't exist for 62. See, I know math. So it was 4th in 72, 5th in 82, 14th in 92, 10th in 2002, so back up again, 10th again in 2012, but was tied for 31st last year, which is still impressive, but that is quite a big drop after being in the top 10 over, except for once, I guess. There's an on-screen quote of Fellini's that goes, "The visionary is the only true realist," which they show at the end of the tribute video that played before he came out to receive his honorary Oscar. So, Bev, what do you think about that quote, "The visionary is the only true realist," and what do you think about this movie?
The visionary is the only true realist. As in, like, surrealism is the only way to show reality?
He started in the movement of...
neorealism.
Right.
In Italy, neorealism
La Strada is a very legitimately life is terrible type of movie. Very real film, which this is not.
Well, I wouldn't say it's the only realism. I would say it is as real, though. I kind of agree with the notion that these surreal films, these dreamlike films, and there's lots of incredible filmmakers that work in that headspace.
Lynch.
Like, David Lynch is the first one that comes up. Charlie Kaufman. I was thinking about Charlie Kaufman a lot when we were watching this movie. It reminded me, I shouldn't say it reminded me of Charlie Kaufman films, but I just have a better handle on those movies than I do on 8½, sadly. This movie is very surreal, but it taps into something about the human experience that is incredibly authentic.
But as I recall, when it ended, you said to me, give your thoughts first. And I said, I've seen it, I think, at least twice, probably only twice. I certainly like it. It is right up my alley.
It's right up your alley. This is a Ryan film through and through.
But I don't truly connect with it. I definitely give it thumbs up. If somebody wanted to know about this movie, I'd say you have to see this movie at least once. It's one of those must-watch movies.
100%.
Maybe more than the other foreign language film. And I know that sounds so bad. The reason why the Oscars changed that is because it sounds like there are no Italians in America. There are no Japanese in America. That's why foreign language seems offensive. I guess that's why it's international feature. But okay, a language you don't speak. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Of all the movies you should see before you die, there's somebody that did a book about that, I guess, or a website about that. This has got to be on there. Absolutely. And if you're a fan of film,
yeah,
you've got to see this. This should be on the very short list if you haven't seen it before. I don't know. I don't really truly grasp it. Maybe because this guy is such a navel gazer, which is maybe why a lot of other filmmakers loved it so much.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that sometimes too. I'm not above being a navel gazer. Our society is filled with navel gazing on the left, the right, and everybody in between. It's well made technically. The acting's pretty good. But then I said this on a Getsu just on Friday, which I really liked a lot. I like that more than I like this. Maybe part of the problem is what's his name? Parasite director Bong Joon-ho said during his speech. He said, don't get hung up on the 1-inch subtitles on the screen. I get his idea with that. I agree with that notion. But it does not help. It's never going to help anybody to have to read the screen. So if you're Japanese watching an American film or a Swedish film, it's the same problem because you can't watch people's faces and you can't truly see their reactions. I had that issue with Ugetsu. I mentioned that a few days ago. And that's the same with this. Maybe that's part of the problem is that this movie does what a lot of American films do. Adaptation is a great example. I think of that one.
I thought of Adaptation too.
But I'm able to watch Cage and Streep and Chris Cooper the whole time. I don't have to read ever.
8½, both is hurt and benefits from subtitles. I say it's hurt because one of the best things about the film is it's really, really beautifully shot. The craft of this film is not something people really talk about very often, but this man was a miracle of blocking and cinematography. The way he uses lighting, it is a work of art. I couldn't find an English subtitle version of the harem scene, and I wanted to watch it again, so I watched a version on YouTube that just didn't have English subtitles.
You could just get Canopy, that's how we saw it.
Oh, whatever. I was at work and I was watching it. I just was on YouTube. And I couldn't understand what they were saying, of course, but I kind of remembered the gist of it all. And the scene came across completely different because I could pay attention to everything that's going on in it. And there's so many details that I missed, or just so many things that it really washes over you, the beauty of that scene. But it's also incredibly wordy. So when you're not an Italian speaker, you really spend that whole scene with your eyes, as Bong Joon-ho put it, the bottom 2 inches of the screen. And you're looking at that instead of appreciating the cinema of it. But I say it benefits Fellini a little bit because, like all Italian filmmakers in the 60s, they didn't shoot any of the real dialogue on set. As a matter of fact, he was getting the actors to read nonsense lines.
Long before the 60s, by the way. This is a holdover from, what's his name again, Mussolini, because they wanted to censor anything that was ever said. We're talking back into the war days, I think, or certainly soon after.
That's so interesting. I noticed that way more, again, when I was watching the movie without paying attention to subtitles. The dubbing is really bad. I mean, the performances
It's a Godzilla
are great.
movie.
Yeah. And in a movie that has so much attention to detail and is so beautiful, it's one perfect frame after another, and then there's this one thing about it that is unbelievably sloppy, and they're just like, oh no, that's by design. He had no script, so he's like, we're just going to go ahead with these scenes, going to write the script later. The way this man worked on the fly, no wonder he's making a movie about the subconscious. He is Guido. He was trying to make a film, and he couldn't come up with a movie to make, and the date was getting closer and closer, and he was panicking, and then he says they were having a toast to the beginning of filming, and he's like, I don't know what movie I'm going to make, and he's like, in that moment, it suddenly all dawned on him and came to him.
If I may steal from adaptation, I've written myself into my own screenplay. That's kind of weird, huh?
Adaptation, which is not like a movie that I think spiritually is that on par with 8½. I think the style is so different. It's a way different movie on so many levels, but it is so 8½, the way that you just get inside the writer's head and it becomes very surreal. And it was all born of massive writer's block.
For Spike Jonze, it would be 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was his second film.
Yeah, that's right. It was. But it's Kaufman's script.
Yeah. So are you thumbs up at least on this?
I'm a lot like you. I respect this film a lot. I am transfixed by the imagery Fellini uses. His vulnerability is astounding. I have really enjoyed reading about this and getting everyone's different takes on it. I love a film that offers something new every time you watch it, and this is it. You could spend a career plumbing the depths of this movie, and surely some people have. But that said, it just doesn't grab me. I don't really enjoy the experience of watching it all that much. It feels, at the moment, at this moment in my life, kind of impenetrable to me.
I know this is a weird one to bring up, but I saw The Paper. I saw Dope Sick finally, and Keaton is great in that. So I thought, I haven't seen The Paper in a while. And I had fun with it all over again. And I worked at a newspaper in college, so I can always feel something for that. And I was thinking about it again a couple of days ago. I thought, I would watch that again tomorrow. We watched 8.5, 5 days, 6 days ago. I don't feel that same way. Now, it doesn't help the movie is 2 hours and 18 minutes long. It does not need to be that long. I do sound like Leonard Maltin. It suffers from overlength, but most movies do. And this certainly fits into that realm too. But we talk about influence. The opening has been referenced in movies for sure, but certainly in one major one, Michael Douglas was in, one of the best things he's ever done. I think one of his favorite roles too, the Joel Schumacher film, Falling Down. At the very beginning, Guido's in a traffic jam. He's desperate to get out of his car, which is what happens to Michael Douglas in Falling Down. Douglas just leaves his car and never goes back to it. And then we see the whole journey he goes through that whole day. This is a dream in Guido's case, though. He gets out through the sunroof and then floats up into the air. But there's a rope around his foot. This is the best part of the whole thing. If the thing had just been that he floats out in the air, that would still be a really memorable, awesome sequence, and people would refer to it. Falling Down probably still would have happened the same way. But the fact that it goes to him being on, I think, a beach, which is probably near where the actual set is for this launch pad for their sci-fi movie, the rocket ship. But he's got a rope around his foot like a kite, and it's his filmmaking associates.
Producers, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the writer and whatnot are pulling him down effectively. We realize it's a dream. We talked about that last week on Rushmore. The opening of that movie is Max having a dream that he's being applauded for solving a math problem, which never comes up again in that movie, but it's just that Max is accepted and yeah! And I speculated later on in the film that he imagines the huge ovation for the Serpico play as well. So maybe Rushmore is referring to this in some ways as well. But I think the fact that it goes to that level, that he, just like in the fantasy about the harem, and all the women, they're just worshiping him. All the women he's wanted to be with and is with, in the case of Louisa, his actual wife. I don't know if Cardinale's in that scene, is she?
Yes, she is.
Oh, she is? Okay, right. So all those women are in that scene, but then in his fantasy, in his dream, he makes it bad. Just like the opening is, I got out of this traffic jam, I'm free, but then yoink, no you're not. So does he think he should be punished? He shouldn't be enjoying these fantasies. He shouldn't be having a good time. He's self-loathing.
I think there's a little bit of sadomasochism there, too. I fell down a few rabbit holes today when I was reading about the movie, and there are some theories. There's such a big component of sex. They kind of make a main character of that prostitute that they play to do the tango. Her name's Saragina. And Saragina appears over and over and over again, and she's a big part of the harem. When he's with his mistress, he gets her to paint her eyebrows like Saragina did. He has this wife who's exceptional, this incredible wife that he should be very into, but sexually he's attracted to this cheap tart who reminds him of this first sexual awakening he had as a boy.
But he has no use for her as a person.
I disagree. I think he has a use for her. She's a prostitute that he encountered once when he was a kid.
No, I mean Carla.
Oh, sorry, yeah. He's a total jerk to Carla. He treats her like she's disposable. Invites drama. He knows she's gonna create drama. As a viewer, you see this woman for 30 seconds, you're like, she's gonna start shit. There's absolutely no way this is not gonna get ugly.
And why bring her to your movie set when you're trying to work?
And then invite your wife as well. Right, so he kind of has these sexual compulsions, and in his mind, they all come back to Saragina, to this moment on the beach when he discovered women in that way for the first time. And she's this incredible character because she's not really traditionally sexy. She's scary. So you might wonder, does he associate sex with fear? Does he associate sex with being dominated, with being punished? Because, again, the very next thing that happens is he's busted and his headmaster punishes him, puts a dunce cap on him. Shame, shame, shame for having these feelings.
He's taught guilt when he's young.
Isn't this the recipe for sadomasochism? And when the women turn on him and they're yelling at him, what does he do? Gets a whip. He's still naked, wrapped in a sheet, and he's running around in that little cowboy hat. I have thoughts about the cowboy. What a bizarre choice.
Especially for an Italian.
For an Italian, but then if you think of Italian filmmaking, the first thing you think of is spaghetti westerns from that time.
Well, I think of these guys, but okay. Second.
Okay, you do because you're cultured. But...
Oh, by the way, quick thing. We were going to cover, I guess it would have been 2 years ago, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I like that movie a lot, but we talked about the lip flap thing. Holy shit. I think Leone told everybody, if you speak English, speak English. If you speak German, do German. Italian, do Italian. Because we're going to dub you later on. It looked nothing like what they were actually saying, which we see in this movie too. So you talk about that's the first thing for a lot of people. Well, we will talk about Tarantino during this podcast a little bit, and he loves that movie. It's one of his favorites. Also, Ride of the Valkyries plays in this movie more than once. So dun 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 dun.
During the harem
dun, 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 yeah. But it plays early on too in the bathroom after the dream sequence. So I think in the very beginning, maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes. Well, Francis Ford Coppola, an Italian, used that in Apocalypse Now so well. And I heard a story, this may not be true, Peter Biskin's book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, I've talked about 1,000 times in this podcast over the years, that apparently when they went over to the Philippines to shoot that movie, out came Francis and his entourage and some of the actors and whatnot on this giant plane, and Melissa Matheson, I believe, so the screenwriter of E.T., Harrison Ford's wife, I think sometime after this, but not at that point, after 1977 or so when they shot that, suggesting he's banging her. They bring all the equipment out, and then his wife, Eleanor, comes out after all that. So maybe Francis in real life, never mind his movie making, related to Fellini, a fellow Italian.
Oh, because he was stepping out on his wife?
But so blatantly.
And inviting the mistress and his wife on the same work trip?
And not even subtly.
Yeah.
According to this story, they're on the same plane. Maybe that wasn't true, but that's what I read. So is this movie, I was going to ask this later, but is Fellini's film sexist, and is Guido, the character, sexist? Either or both?
I'm so glad you asked this.
Go ahead.
I knew you would ask me this.
I'll sit back and
It's like I'm going to have to answer this film if it's sexist or not. So, of course, we start from the place that this film was made in Italy in the early 60s. I think it depicts sexism, but it has a surprising amount of insightful reflection about sexism, about the limitations of the roles between men and women. He's obsessed with women, but not just in this lascivious way. He understands that there's something wrong with his relationship with women, and this is what he's exploring. So Guido knows he wants to be rescued by this perfect woman, this very young, very beautiful angel who's as much his mother as his lover and has no needs or wants or personality beyond how she serves him. Claudia gets casted. She's this fantasy woman that keeps reappearing. You see Saragina the prostitute over and over again, and you see this fantasy woman
Claudia
over and over,
Cardinale,
who couldn't look more opposite
terrible casting.
Saragina.
Couldn't you find somebody good looking in Italy to play this character?
She's so beautiful.
She's on the short list of the most beautiful women who've ever been in movies.
Maybe ever been, period. But the film keenly understands that this is a fantasy. Almost in contrast to all the other women in the movie who have these really beautiful, distinct characters. They are not homogenous. They are all very different, and they're all very independent. Look, whose opinion does he respect more than anyone else's? It's his wife's best friend who comes with her on the trip.
Not his wife, right.
He has these beautiful, insightful conversations with her, and he listens to her in a way he doesn't listen to the men in the movie.
Or to his wife.
I don't know. I think he respects his wife. I think
but
he
no,
really
the friend
does love
more
her.
so.
Yeah, no, it's true. She gets through to him in a way no one else really does seem to.
I liked also it isn't suggested that they were ever stepping out with each other. He just actually connects with her as a human being.
And he respects her and listens to her.
Yeah.
Another Sergio Leone movie that we've seen, we haven't covered. Did we cover Once Upon a Time in the West?
We did.
Oh, we did.
Which Cardinale is in and is maybe even more beautiful in that than she's in this.
She's so beautiful in that movie. But I would say that movie, not to be like, Once Upon a Time in the West is sexist, but Once Upon a Time in the West is like a totally sexist movie.
Earlier today, though, I'm getting my notes finalized. I'm thinking that they cast this person who was already a star in Italy, and then she did the Pink Panther the year after this, by the way. Once Upon a Time in the West was the end of the decade. I think in that, not so much this, because it's, maybe the role's not real at all. We'll talk about that in a second. Once Upon a Time in the West with Henry Fonda and Jason Robards and Brillinson, I think she's great in that movie. I think she does a terrific job of not only being flawlessly beautiful, which she is, but also performs quite well. She's a good actress. This isn't just somebody who got to the top because she was hot. She could really bring it. We don't see that here. That's not the point of the character. But okay, how about that? Is she ever real? So we know she's not real a lot of the time, but even when she shows up towards the end of the movie and then he drives off with her, is anybody else present? Is it possible he just imagined that she's even there at all? It's almost like somebody who's making a movie and maybe they're a big name, but they want to get Meryl Streep, but they're not big enough to get Meryl Streep. And then they have this fantasy that Meryl Streep is with them. Mm-hmm. Or a better example, maybe Margot Robbie, because Streep's a great actress, but Robbie's very talented, but also
one of the biggest stars
19 out of 10 when it comes, well, because of Barbie.
Yeah,
but as far as looks go, so you get this woman who's not only talented, but also beautiful. She's those things in spades. So then you're having this fantasy that she's there with you on this set. Do we ever see him interact with her when anyone else is even around? So is it possible that her whole role is a fantasy role? Is she Ed Harris in A Beautiful Mind, where she's never real?
I actually wonder that as well. For the most part, I find it's pretty easy to tell when the movie is in reality.
I do
when
too.
It's fantasy.
Either
flashbacks
flashbacks
that is like a
or
pretty
fantasies.
gray area
where
you're like, but does she exist? Because she's clearly made up. Yeah, it's really impossible for me to infer Fellini's intentions and feelings towards these women. But I'm not at all tempted to pick on a 60-year-old Italian film that has half a dozen unique, deep, interesting women characters who advocate for themselves versus a movie like Once Upon a Time in the West where, as I recall, she's the only woman in that movie.
It helps she wins in the end in that movie.
I guess.
Fellini's also calling out his main character because of that whole thing in the harem. Because anybody who has a fantasy about having everybody that ever mattered to you be, and it doesn't even matter it's the harem, but they're part of a scene and everybody's in it. And it's the fantasy women you might have in your life, or women you actually did sleep with, and your wife, and a woman that you saw when you were 10 and you were hot for her, or you liked her, whatever. Maybe your school teacher, girlfriends, whatever. Girl friends, not girlfriends. They could all be in this fantasy you have. But how many of us would go to the level of, during that fantasy, them treating you badly? Because we come back to that. Did he deserve it? Which I guess in his mind he did.
It was a really long time ago, but I had my pet theory when we talked about Vertigo.
Yeah.
That the whole second half of the film is all in his head because it goes from him being in a mental institution to weird things happening that fix all the things that went wrong in the first half of the film.
Until he ruins it.
Oh, she wasn't actually dead, and then he ruins it.
And she loved me.
And she loved me. But he spoils his own fantasy in my pet theory. Can you not relate to having a brain that spoils even your fantasies?
Yeah, I probably can.
Isn't that just part of human nature that we can sit there and indulge in fantasies, but ultimately our brain will sabotage them? We can't even indulge in uncomplicated fantasies.
I said Tarantino a few minutes ago, by the way. I wouldn't have thought that Tarantino would be influenced by this movie, but he must have been. Because for one thing, you see the Pulp Fiction twist dance, the twist contest. It was a teenage wedding and the old folks wished him well. When they do the twist in that movie, Travolta and Thurman, we see that in this. And also playing with timeline, which of course Tarantino did. And I think he always made it pretty clear. Reservoir Dogs doesn't really do that. It's just flashing back. Pulp Fiction does play with the timeline way more so, and it's confusing the first time you see the film. But this movie does that, especially when it comes to the flashback stuff. And you just said it a minute ago, and I agree with you. We've also seen this more than once. But I think you can identify what's not real and what is real. And it's not like it's a gauzy lens or a type of thing when he's a kid. Of course, we have to be looking at some kind of, either he's imagining it or he's remembering it.
It's a memory, yeah. And you actually do get that kind of surreal sense of, okay, this looks a little bit dreamlike, but it's just the dreamlike nature of a 40-year-old memory.
The lens is not gauzed or anything like that. And then when you see him as an adult first walks into the room where all the women are, it could be real until you realize, well, they can't all be here, especially Saragina, because she wouldn't look the same after all these years. So Tarantino, at least in a couple of different ways, had to be referencing 8.5 in his own movies. And of course, he's very meta. This movie's very meta.
Even if you're a director who's not directly influenced by Fellini and specifically this film, you're probably influenced by a director who's influenced by this film. It's one of those works of art that just has tendrils that changed film history when you put it on the list of the greatest films ever made. If you were to make a list of the most influential films ever made, it would stay in the top 10 forever.
I think so. More so than a lot of the top 10. We've covered some of them just this year. In the Mood for Love. We did Mulholland Drive many years ago. We just did Gene Dealman recently. We've done Citizen Kane, Vertigo. Tokyo Story was just this year. Well, another filmmaker who obviously was influenced by this, and I think it's been on his list when he's voted for the Sight and Sound many times, is Scorsese.
Yeah.
There are a lot of ways he could be referring to 8.5, but a big one would be the guilt.
Oh, the Catholic guilt. Yeah.
Ebert said that about either Taxi Driver or maybe it was Goodfellas, actually. That the message he takes from Goodfellas, which as great as that movie is, what is exactly not even the point, but what do you get out of it? Ebert wrote that at the end of that movie, Henry's caught and he goes into witness relocation and rats on his friends, betraying what Jimmy had said to him as a kid. Never rat on your friends and always keep your mouth shut. Does both of those things. He rats on his friends and he opens his mouth and has this terrible life and doesn't seem repentant about it at all. But I think the key point that Ebert wrote in that review is that Scorsese's a filmmaker with that one, and probably a lot of his other, well, definitely a lot of his other movies, is that it's not so much that he did these things and got caught, it's that he'd like to do them again. And the real life Henry Hill did do them again. I pointed that out to you recently in one of the episodes we did, maybe Wolf of Wall Street, that scumbag has done a lot of bad things since he went to witness relocation. And then you think, I learned the hard way, man. I could be in jail for the rest of my life like the guys I ratted out are. So I think Marty's whole thing with this movie would be, I was taught Catholic guilt, and I'll always feel it. But at the same point, it's not that I feel bad that I did these things. I feel worse that I want to do them again right now. And I said that in one of our recent podcasts, that Marty's a recovering drug addict. If he ever relapsed, we've never heard about it in all these decades since the early 80s. But somebody who went down that road had to have enjoyed it and must have wanted to do that again.
Catholic shame is not just that they shame the acts that you commit, it's that they shame your very nature. You're this person, you're a wrong person. And if you're going to shame sexuality, well, then the vast majority of people are going to feel like they are wrong in God's eyes because the Catholic Church is telling them that they are.
And we see the Catholic Church in this movie in the form of cardinals. And he's got no answers for him either.
Nobody has an answer for him. He turns to the church. It's an Italian movie, so it would make perfect sense that he would want the cardinal's advice. The Catholic Church wasn't always super fond of Fellini either. They turned on him during La Dolce Vita because it opens with that famous scene where there's the Christ statue that's flying over Rome. And
with a helicopter.
Helicopter, yeah.
It's not fantastical, it's real.
And they just didn't like the message of that film. And I think they had mixed reviews for 8.5. Some people thought it supported the church. Some people thought it offended the church.
The poor church.
The poor church.
Underdogs. Well, some fun things in this movie, though, too. And I think I read that Fellini thought this was a comedy, which reminds me of Hitchcock, thinking Psycho and so on were comedies. Okay, you're a little sick.
You know that he had a piece of paper that he wrote, "Don't forget, this is a comic film," and he put it on the front of the camera so that the actors could always see it.
Oh, I thought that meant it was for him to see, but okay, either way, that works, I guess.
Maybe I read it wrong. Maybe you're right.
I think either way it makes sense, actually. We didn't laugh, but I thought, and I pointed this out to you in the scene, he goes in the steam room with his glasses on. If it gets remotely warm, we're getting cooler here in Ontario mid-September. The bathroom mirror is getting steamed up from my shower already. You don't wear glasses into a steam room. They're not going to last at all. You won't be able to see anything. What do you do that for? So I guess that's supposed to be a comic thing. Did you think the movie was funny at all? We didn't laugh at it. But again, maybe we would have if we spoke Italian.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It could have been funnier in Italian, but it has a lightness to it. It's not that serious. And maybe it's him getting away from his new realism roots. Lighten up, buddy! Stop trying to go back to how life is suffering and all these themes that you visited before.
Well, at the end, it does seem to be the moral is that people matter, and trying to be happy matters. Deep.
He shoots himself, and then doesn't it just play in fantasy after that? They're like, oh, let's shut the film down, and then everybody's there, and every character in the film is doing the dance around him.
I was picturing the shooting thing was bullshit, and it could be that was real, and he's dying, and his dying fever dream, like in Taxi Driver at the end, again, Scorsese, I saved this girl who didn't want to be saved in the first place, and I'll be a hero to the press. And Betsy will respect me at the very end. And I don't think the last 5 or 10 minutes of that movie is real at all. After he does the thing when the cops walk into that brothel. So maybe that's the same thing here. This guy does kill himself, which doesn't seem logical. He's going to that level to kill himself. But if he does, then that whole thing where everybody in the entire movie, I think, every single actor,
including Saragina, his parents,
who couldn't
people
look like
who
that
were
anymore,
people are definitely dead.
The Launchpad set, and they're dancing, and everybody's happy. Everybody is happy.
Speaking of dancing, you talk about the connection to Taxi Driver. I want to talk about the connection to The Seventh Seal, that Ingmar Bergman film, and Bergman and Fellini were friends, so you know he saw that movie, you know he respected him as a filmmaker, and how does Seventh Seal end? It ends with all the remaining characters holding hands and dancing in the line because, spoiler alert, they've all died from plague. And it's like their trip to the afterlife, but they're holding hands and kind of dancing in this merry circus-like way. This has a circus. If anything, it's an homage, a little nod to his friend Bergman. Oh, yes, we're all marching our way off to death.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm not sure if he's alive or dead at the end of the movie.
I didn't think that he was actually supposed to be dead from the gunshot thing because I think I was taking a note and didn't realize that he had a gun in the first place. And when he pulls it out and shoots, I think there's a quick cut, and I wasn't really registering what had happened because I know I've seen this before, but it's been a very long time. I did remember the ending for sure about how everybody's involved in that, and it's just this dancing sequence. And apparently Fellini played music on set because there was no dialogue being recorded because you couldn't because of Italian censorship.
They seem sometimes like they're dancing. It's because there's always music playing. There's a rhythm that invites them to all move at the same rhythm.
Yeah. Obviously, Louisa is not the most important part of this film at all. Important part of this film. Important part of this film. But when she does come, and she is Anouk Aimée, I think that's how you say her name, she does a pretty good job in a limited role. She does say it's over, but their marriage, when she sees how the auditions are going, so she's watching dailies with everybody else and realizes, I'm a shrew, or I'm this thing. That's what you think of me?
See me.
I didn't like you. Well, they were having their problems to begin with, and this is how you see me. Well, then, to hell with you. But this is a guy who already doesn't really want to make this movie, doesn't know what it's about. He's lost the plot. He's been criticized by a critic, apparently. I thought it was just the writer. I read online it was a critic that was doing that early on.
He hired the critic to tell him which ideas were good and which were bad, and the critic just criticizes everything he comes up with.
Fair enough, which you probably would do.
It's kind of like part of the onslaught of people putting pressure on him.
And she does that too by bailing, but then that's when Claudia shows up. And they go on that drive. Things look ideal again. He takes her out to the launchpad set, but there's no actual part for her. He confesses to her in the first place, which is one of the reasons I thought she's not real at all. That, okay, the person may have been the character, Claudia Cardinale. They don't say it's literally her, but she is called Claudia. But it could be any superstar in that time frame. It could have been Sophia Loren. I want her in this movie, but you don't get her. So the entire role is just him hoping and imagining somebody's not actually a part of his movie at all. It's funny, she's second billed, yet her character, as much as I love her in the movies I've seen her in, doesn't matter that much. Because he's idealizing Saragina and to some degree his wife and other characters more than her. He sees her a few times in the course of, he imagines her a few times in the course of the storyline, but she doesn't really matter that much. It's not like it's a driving force that, I gotta get to her, I want to sleep with her, I want to be with her, I want to star her in my movie. She's an ideal woman, as they say, but it's not all that relevant to what he's actually doing.
Beyond an ideal woman, she almost, to me, represents easy answers. That, there's one thing that could happen that could solve all my problems. If only I met this girl. I think we kind of all have that in our fantasies, too. If only I had all this money, or I had this job I wanted, or if only I met the person I was meant to be with, then all of my anxieties and troubles would dissolve away, and I could just finally be happy. The thing this movie does the best, which is maybe part of the reason I don't find it enjoyable to watch because it's so incredibly effective, is it just is anxiety. From the first frame, from that dream sequence, it just puts you in the space of somebody who has painted themselves into a corner and the stakes are really high and he doesn't know how he's going to get out of this mess, and we're just watching this guy ruin his life through not being able to do his job, through not being able to manage his personal relationships, and the best he can do is just deke out of one situation after another.
It just hit me. Remember that great documentary, Lost in La Mancha?
Yeah.
Terry Gilliam was making a Don Quixote movie.
Who also loves Fellini.
Fair. And a lot of things went wrong. And I saw that movie they eventually made only a few years ago. They finally did it many years after they were supposed to, probably 20 years later or something like that, or almost 20 years later. But it seems like he's somebody who is, well, we know he's talented. He'd made many movies before, and I love 12 Monkeys especially.
And he's an auteur as well. True
and he
auteur
worked
like
with the Pythons and was a director with them, so he'd made several movies. But now he's making a movie where, in that documentary, and documentaries can skew things, you never know, but it seems like he is a pie-in-the-sky dreamer when, dude, you've made many movies. Why are you so unrealistic about how you're directing this? You're supposed to be in charge. And it does feel like Fellini. It does feel like Guido is not acting like the boss. And yet the movie's suggesting that he'd had some prior big successes, say La Dolce Vita, for example. And now here's your big sci-fi movie. What happened to Spielberg after? Of course, Jaws was a big movie. The budget was big enough to begin with. But he'd made Sugarland Express, which was a location movie, and then the movie on the ocean that was such a tough shoot. But what came after that? The sci-fi movie with a huge budget, which also succeeded. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is what I'm talking about here. Now, that was many years later. It's not like Fellini was referring to Spielberg. Of course, Spielberg's movie, he cared about the subject matter. It was his story, I believe. He got writing credit on that as well. But Guido doesn't care about this story. That's part of why he loses the plot. He doesn't give a shit about why they're making this specific sci-fi movie. The Launchpad set is enormous and all this. It doesn't matter. So it's a movie about movies, and yet we don't really ever see them shoot a movie, and the director doesn't care about the movie they're supposed to be shooting.
It's so funny you bring up Terry Gilliam because I watched this great interview with him where he talked about Fellini. He said that this movie gets something that no one else gets. the job of a director is all smoke and mirrors, and that actually everybody else makes the movie. It's your actors, it's your writers, it's your costume designers, it's your set builders, it's your cinematographer. Those are the people that are actually making the movies. And the director is just there to pretend he has the answers, but he never actually has the answers. He's like, now I realize how real this movie is because people always want to know what to do, and I have no idea. And when I don't give them an answer, they go out and do what they want to do, and their decisions are often right, which is so funny to think because Terry Gilliam's movies are such Terry Gilliam movies, right? You see a frame of a Terry Gilliam movie, and you know you're watching a Terry Gilliam movie. But he really highly related to this film. And maybe it's just that notion that he's like, I can have whatever I want and you guys will make it happen, right?
But
and that was the movie where it couldn't happen. Yeah.
It's funny, too, that the assistant director, Konnichiya, Conoccia, he's the assistant director, right? And Guido apologizes to him before the scene at the press conference, during the scene at the press conference. That's Uncut Gems type of intensity.
Yeah.
But he finds the time to apologize to him before he goes under the table and shoots himself. Because earlier in the movie, he had not respected the assistant director, Konnichiya. I'm probably saying that wrong. But I'm just thinking about... There you go.
There's the accent, I promise you.
There it is. People can't see it. Bab's doing the hand.
Konnichiya.
But in the Lost in La Mancha documentary, the assistant director is the one who gets fired. And yet, what we see in that documentary... He's the only thing keeping that movie together at all.
He's the only one trying to say no to him.
Right.
No, we can't do this. No, that's too risky. No, if this goes sideways, we are all screwed. And he's like, yes. And then it went sideways and they
He could actually be the unit manager, whatever it is. But that dude, I forget his name now, but he's basically in charge.
Some poor soul who took the blame for the director's poor decision-making.
So I guess that's another reason why filmmakers really respect and like this movie. Yeah, Day for Night was influenced by this, so that's the Truffaut film. I like that one a lot. All That Jazz, obviously. Living in Oblivion. I thought about watching that last night because it's on Canopy always, which is how we saw this. Adaptation, we've already said. 9 on Broadway refers to this.
It's like a direct adaptation of
And then the movie was Daniel Day-Lewis and Nicole Kidman and a lot of huge names. I didn't like it very much, but it's definitely a play on 8.5. So the cast of 8.5, Marcello Mastroianni worked for about 50 years and did La Dolce Vita and also La Notte for Antonioni, I believe it is. I saw that not that long ago. It was pretty good. We talked about Cardinale's credits, the big one being Once Upon a Time in the West, which we covered several years ago. Anouk Aimée was in La Dolce Vita and got an Oscar nomination for A Man and a Woman, which I believe was later in this decade of the 60s. Sandra Milo, M-I-L-O, does play Carla. She's the mistress. She was in Juliet of the Spirits by Fellini, later in this decade. Rosella Falk is Rosella, the friend. She did Modesty Blaise in 1966, and that's Vincent's book. Another Pulp Fiction reference in Pulp Fiction.
Oh.
He's reading the book, Modesty Blaise, in that scene in the beginning. Well, I guess it's really at the end of the movie, really, when Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer are robbing the diner. They cut to him just flipping through his book. And that's got to be another Pulp Fiction reference, or Tarantino reference as well. And then Barbara Steele is Gloria. She was in Black Sunday for Mario Bava, and then did Shivers and Piranha. So a lot of horror films in your resume. There's a lot of other actors, but they're the ones I wanted to mention the most. And of course, Mastroianni. We haven't talked about him all that much, but a hell of a good leading man. Oh. And in 1993 at the Oscars when Fellini won, he was obviously older, white hair and everything. I think he had a cane even. But he still looks pretty dashing.
Oh, he's hot. And he has this charisma. There's that scene where he's just walking down the hall and he just spontaneously does the little dance and just carries on with his day. And he can be so emasculated and silly in this movie, and yet it never dulls his shine. He is an incredible presence. I know why Fellini would cast him to play himself. Like, don't we all want to be this guy? Yeah. He can even pull off a tiny cowboy hat.
Fellini directed La Strada, Knights of Cabiria, or Cabiria, I don't know how you pronounce that. La Dolce Vita, Juliet of the Spirits, Amarcord, and he had twice as many writing credits as directing credits, so he wrote for other people. His co-writers and regular collaborators on other things, I looked up all these guys, so they were more than once working with Fellini. Ennio Flaniano, love that name, Tullio Pinielli, and Brunello Rondi, so more than once they were in Fellini credits. And the producer was Angelo Rizzoli, who worked on La Dolce Vita. That's a good movie. Maybe we'll cover that one of these days. Umberto D. and some American films as well. The movie's 185-1. We saw a gorgeous black and white Criterion print on Canopy. So is it Canadian only that's Canopy? Anyway, the library service here in Toronto at least. That's how we saw this. That's how I saw Ugetsu last week. I covered that on Friday. And it looked great. Sounded great.
Surprisingly good selection of classic films, foreign language films.
And Criterion.
And Criterion films, yeah.
That alone would cover you for months. Just that on Canopy. The cinematographer Gianni Di Venanzo, I think I got that right. He shot...
Di Venanzo!
There's the hand. He shot Juliet of the Spirits and also La Notte with Mastroianni through his viewfinder yet again. Got to look at that face more than once. The editor, Leo Catazzo, was a Fellini regular as his cutter. This was his last film, though. I didn't see if he died or anything, but this is his last film on his resume. And the composer, Nino Rota. So this is the Godfather guy. And he won an Oscar for Godfather Part 2. The reason why his nomination for the first Godfather was rescinded is because apparently he was sampling music he had done for Fellini. I'm not sure about this particular movie, but Fellini movies were being sampled in the Godfather score. So they said, this isn't original. It can't be an original score, Nino. So you see that on the IMDb and other places where it was originally a nomination, but then wasn't, even though the Godfather theme is one of the most famous of all time.
Oh, yeah.
And he was regularly working with Fellini. He does good music here. And we said before that that's what was playing on set, or somebody's music was playing on set, not the actual dialogue. They were just speaking whatever they wanted to say.
So I'm not sure if we can even find whoever gets the credit for this, but this film has some pretty cool special effects. And I love how Fellini goes for it, that no matter how hard it must have been to get that incredible shot of the foot with the string attached to the man on the beach, and he's very high up, and then you see the body fall. I don't know how they did that. Mm-hmm. If it was a dummy or an actor. And then add to that the floating scenes and the incredible huge set that they built only to tear it down. All these things that you could have just made a suggestion for. There's all these ways that you could have cut corners, faked it, but he really goes there, and those shots are so beautiful. You get so much bang for your buck out of that stuff. I'm not saying that's true for every single director, every single film, but here I love that he really goes big. All the technicals are incredible, but for the editor, when I was rewatching certain scenes, I was rewatching the dream sequence off the top, and it uses this really well done technique of the brief freeze frames. Do you remember?
Okay.
Panning across the people who are staring at him while they're sitting in cars, and it just freezes on them for maybe 15 frames.
So a bit of a horror thing then, too.
Yes, and as soon as your brain registers that it's frozen, it's moved on. And it only does it maybe 3 or 4 times, and then it never does it again in the film. It's such a cool technique. And for 1963, I certainly couldn't sit here and tell you if it was the first film to ever use it. It probably wasn't. But it feels really innovative for a film that's this old.
The movie's 2 hours and 18 minutes long, so I'm definitely saying it's way too long. And yet I think it's well edited within the scenes themselves. And that opening especially is well edited.
It doesn't move us. I feel the opposite about La Dolce Vita. That movie got to my soul. It's similar in a lot of ways to this film in style, the same starring actor, the same vibe in many ways. But I felt that movie. And this just didn't work on me. So I just wonder if it truly is a preference thing. This movie, he made it from his heart, and there are people who feel what he's feeling, who see what he's seeing, and can feel this movie all the way through. And that's how it ended up on the top of the Sight and Sound list, and like a million other lists of greatest films ever made. You and I are not on that wavelength, and so we're not going to feel it.
I think I have been at other times. Maybe I watched this in the wrong day, because this kind of movie has appealed to me so often before. Some of my favorites are movies about movies.
Yeah.
And it's not like I didn't like this. If somebody said to me, should I watch this? It would depend. Casual friends of ours, I like movies. But do you? Do you care about Gene Dealman? No. Do you care about 8.5?
But they can still
Probably
like movies. They just prefer more popcorn, Hollywood fare. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's films, like lots of people I would never recommend this movie to, of course.
There are films made in other countries. You could recommend it. They maybe wouldn't like it. But you can recommend a movie that's in Japanese or Swedish or Chinese or
I've recommended
Italian.
Parasite to virtually everybody I met. In 2019, I couldn't run into a stranger in the street without telling them to go see Parasite.
They thought you were weird.
I am weird.
I just want to know where the bibliothèque is.
The bibliothèque.
Where's the patisserie?
Have you seen Parasite yet?
Where's the boulangerie? What am I talking about? I don't know. So what happens next? With that many people, some of whom are very attractive, Claudia Cardinale and Marcello Mastroianni, all in one place at one time, having so much fun and realizing there's always some kind of joy to be found in life, which is what the movie's about at the end, I think. Not that deep. Anyway, all that stuff, gotta have an orgy.
Hell yeah.
Maybe dancing. They're about to dance, laying down.
Cardinal, turn around. You don't want to see this.
Cardinal, turn around, so Cardinale.
Yes.
I'm sorry to objectify you, but
Well, there's lots of beautiful women in this movie.
I love the fact that the movies I've seen of her, she really does bring it. She's not just some pretty face and that's all she had to offer. She can act, too. She didn't get a chance to do much of that in this movie, at least. Anouk Aimée, though, I would have loved to have seen a movie with her and Mastroianni actually really, truly battling it out for more than just maybe 30 minutes in total. Probably not even that much. Because their marriage does seem like it's worth trying to save. And at the end, they are part of the dancing. It seems like they're going to be okay. They're probably not. Because maybe you're right. Maybe he's already dead.
Their marriage is certainly dead.
Well, she said it was anyway, yeah.
But they still have tons of chemistry. It's a tragedy because it's clear he really loves her and he needs her, and it's clear she loves him too, but she's just been betrayed by him too many times, and their relationship could work in another time and place, and if he could stop sleeping with other women or dicking her around is what he's doing. So it's kind of sweet and optimistic that they do kind of wind up together at the end, if it's heaven, if it's the afterlife, and he winds up with her.
You know, it's funny, we mentioned Taxi Driver, that the rest of that is just he died and he wants it to all be perfect. He saved the girl and he has respect from the woman he wanted to be with. That's what's interesting about that ending. It's not that he has a date with Betsy. He doesn't sleep with Betsy. She's not in love with him. It's just that she shows him a little bit of respect.
He impresses her. That's what he really wants.
Well, she never got before.
To be impressed.
Although then again, he did get that before because she went on a date with him in the first place.
Yeah, that's true.
But then he ruins it pretty quickly. Yeah, we could talk for probably another hour about just the other filmmakers who've been influenced by this movie. But Tarantino is the one that surprised me the most in my research. I'm not surprised about Marty. I'm not surprised about Coppola and Lynch, Gilliam, and so on. But Tarantino. So last thoughts on 8.5.
Well, I don't necessarily need to totally get this film to appreciate it, and maybe someday it will click for me. And I could watch it just for an excuse to stare at Marcello Mastroianni for 2.5 hours. That's enough motivation for me.
Well, it's such a revered classic, and I was glad to see it again, but I never truly connected with it. Maybe part of the problem, especially in the last several years, 2023 in particular, a successful person putting it blatantly on screen that they're struggling with how their life has gone is not a bad storyline. It just feels pretty whiny compared to what so many people with real problems go through every minute of the day. Oh, poor director, boy, I can't figure out what to do with his career. So maybe that's part of the problem. It's very navel-gazy, and I love movies like that. But then again, a lot of the movies that are about movies that are navel-gazy are also funny. And this may have been intended to be, but we didn't laugh, so that didn't help anything either. It's a black comedy at best. The Hitchcock thing, strike goes a comedy, really. But the goods certainly outweigh the bads. I just doubt either of us will see those goods or those bads again anytime soon.
Let's watch the Dolce Vita instead.
We probably should watch that again, yeah. Maybe it's on Canopy, I don't know. There's a lot of great stuff on there. So that was 8.5. In 7 days, it will be October 2nd and a half. No, just October 2nd. I don't love the approach of winter, but I do love October. Good movies get released. It's the month of baseball playoffs, and it's also the month of my favorite observance, Halloween. So that means we'll finally be in Scary Movie Month, our 8th one, in fact. We're planning to release 7 episodes, and the first one you'll get will be the James Wan haunted house mega hit, The Conjuring, which you have not seen. I think we're covering 3 movies next month that you've never seen before. The coming attractions trivia for The Conjuring. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga have appeared in many successful movies and have also worked together several times. Obviously, the various Conjuring movies and some of their spin-offs, but also the Liam Neeson thriller, The Commuter. So they've got something like 6 movies they've done together. Yet despite all those blockbusters and often zeitgeisty flicks on their resumes, we've only covered 1 movie for each of them before. Name those 2 films. One for him, one for her.
All right, so for the answers to that question, check out next week's podcast about The Conjuring. You obviously already know how to find us, but let me remind you to please favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes that are available for free. Is there a movie you'd like to hear us cover? Well, you can make a recommendation by leaving us a review, or you can just leave us a rating because you like us and you want to help us reach more listeners. It's a great way to support the podcast. We're both on Twitter. I'm at BevEllisEllis and Ryan is at MovieFiend51, or you can reach us by email. Have you ever seen podcast@gmail.com? And we'd love to hear from you guys. We really do. And you can also find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES and enjoy a 20% discount.
Grazie and buonasera.
Ciao, ciao. And cut.